mint mark, condition, or unusual features. Now, let's take a closer look at this 1949 Canadian 1-cent coin featuring King George VI. Because at first glance, it may look like nothing more than an old copper penny. But when you slow down and examine the details, this little coin becomes much more interesting. Struck by the Royal Canadian Mint, the 1949 1-cent was made from a copper-rich alloy containing 98% copper, along with tin and zinc, and it weighs about 3.4 grams. More than 33 million were struck for circulation, so the date itself is not extremely rare. But here is where collectors need to pay attention, because the small details can make a major difference. On the front, you can see the portrait of King George VI, facing left. Surrounded by the Latin inscription, Georgius VI de Gratia Rex, this was the king who reigned during one of the most important periods in Canadian history, including the Second World War and the years that followed. Turn the coin over, and you'll find the classic Canadian maple leaf design, with 2 maple leaves on a single twig, along with the denomination, 1 cent, the date 1949, and the word Canada. The design was created by G.E. Kruger Gray, whose work became an important part of Canadian coin history. Coinsand Canadacum. Now look closely at the condition of your coin. If the surfaces are heavily worn, the portrait is flat, and the maple leaves have lost most of their detail, the coin may have only a modest collector value. But if your 1949 example still shows strong hair detail on George VI, clear lettering, sharp maple leaves, and much of its original surface, the story changes. Current guide estimates put ordinary circulated examples in the low dollar range, while very fine and extremely fine examples can bring several dollars, and uncirculated pieces can approach around $10 depending on the variety and grade. Those numbers may not sound shocking yet, but there is a fascinating detail that serious collectors know to check before putting this coin away. Numista. Look carefully at the second A in the word Gratia on the obverse. Its position in relation to the tiny border denticles can help distinguish different 1949 varieties. In one variety, the A points between 2 denticles. In another, it points directly toward a denticle. That tiny difference can be easy to miss unless you know exactly where to look. But varieties like this are one reason experienced collectors never judge an old coin simply by its age or face value. Coinsand Canadacum. And here is the most important warning. Do not confuse natural age toning with a rare mint error. A dark, brown, or uneven color can happen as copper reacts with the environment over many decades. Scratches, corrosion, cleaning marks, stains, and damage can also affect a coin's appearance without making it rare. What collectors really want to see is original detail, strong surfaces, and a legitimate variety or mint-made error that can be confirmed under close examination. So, could this 1949 George VI Canadian cent be worth a fortune? An ordinary circulated example is not a hundreds of thousands of dollars coin, and it would be misleading to claim otherwise. But a high-quality specimen, especially one with the recognized variety or unusual mint-made feature, deserves a much closer look before you dismiss it as just another old penny. The real treasure here is knowing what you have. And if your coin has unusually sharp details, original-looking surfaces, or a strange feature that appears to have happened during striking, that is when you should consider having it examined by a qualified Canadian coin specialist or professional grading service. That is what makes old coins so exciting. Sometimes the value is not written in big letters. Sometimes it is hidden in one tiny letter, one tiny denticle, or one unusual detail that most people would never notice. So before you throw a 1949 Canadian 1-cent coin into a jar of ordinary change, take a magnifying glass, check the portrait, study the maple leaves, inspect the lettering, and most importantly, look closely at that second in Gratia. You may not be holding a fortune, but you could be holding a fascinating piece of Canadian history, and that is exactly why collectors continue searching through old coins decades after they first entered circulation. Opening parenthesis coinsandcanada.com. Now, let's move on to this 2012 United Kingdom 1 penny coin. because the color change you can see on the surface immediately makes this coin worth a closer look. At first, it may look like an ordinary modern penny, but there are several details collectors should check before deciding what it is worth. This is a 2012 one-penny coin featuring Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Royal Shield design on the reverse. The coin was struck by the Royal Mint, and the standard 2012 one-penny issue had a very large mintage of about 227.2 million pieces, so the date by itself does not make it rare. It is made from copper-plated steel, weighs about 3.56 grams, measures just over 20 millimeters across, and because of its steel core, a normal example should be magnetic. Royal Mint. Now take a close look at the coin you have shown me. The first thing that stands out is the change in color. Instead of having the bright reddish copper appearance you might expect from a newer penny, this coin has developed a darker and more uneven tone. That can happen naturally as the thin copper plating reacts with moisture, air, handling, and the environment over time. So a color change alone does not automatically mean the coin is a rare mint error. In fact, collectors need to be very careful here, because natural toning, staining, corrosion, chemical exposure, and damage can all create unusual colors after a coin leaves the mint. But there is something important you should never ignore. Look at the copper surface very carefully. Because this 2012 penny is copper-plated steel, the copper layer is much thinner than the solid bronze used on older British pennies. If the surface has been scratched or worn through, the underlying steel can become visible. That can create a silver-gray appearance or patches of different color. If you see a strange area, do not clean it, do not polish it, and definitely do not try chemicals to make the coin look brighter. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and make an already interesting coin less desirable to collectors. Now turn your attention to the reverse. You should see the Royal Shield of Arms, designed by Matthew Dent. The 2008 redesign divided the Royal Shield across the circulating denominations, so the one-penny coin represents one section of the larger shield. The design includes the word one penny, while the obverse carries the fourth portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Ian Rank Broadley. Royal Mint. Here is where your magnifying glass comes in. Check the Queen's portrait for doubled lettering, unusual lines, missing details, or anything that appears raised rather than simply scratched into the surface. Then inspect the Royal Shield. Look around. The shield, the lettering, the date, and the rim. A genuine mint error can sometimes make a modern coin much more interesting than an ordinary example. But remember, a scratch caused by circulation is not the same thing as a mint-made error. The difference can mean everything to a collector. And now, let's talk about value, because this is where expectations need to stay realistic. A normal circulated 2012 one-penny coin is generally worth around face value, and even standard uncirculated examples are not automatically valuable. Numismatic references list the ordinary 2012 circulation issue as having a large mintage, while special brilliant uncirculated examples can command a modest premium. One dealer, for example, currently lists a 2012 Royal Shield 1p in brilliant uncirculated condition at £11.95, showing how much condition and presentation can change the value compared with an ordinary circulated penny. Coin hunter. So what would make your coin truly exciting? The answer is not simply the dark color. You would want to find something unusual that can be connected to the minting process, such as a genuine striking error, an unusual planchet problem, a major off-center strike, or another confirmed variety. And if your color change is caused by damage or environmental exposure, the coin may actually be worth less than a clean, well-preserved example. That is why identification comes before valuation. There is also another interesting point about the 2012 issue. Alongside the regular circulation coins, the Royal Mint produced special brilliant, uncirculated, and proof versions. One specialist reference records 77,725 brilliant uncirculated pieces and 26,552 proof examples for the 2012 one-penny issue. These special versions are different from an ordinary penny found in circulation, and collectors should not confuse them with a rare circulation error. New Mista, so if you have a 2012 Shield penny with a strange color, here is your checklist. First, check the date. Second, inspect Queen Elizabeth I's portrait. Third, study the royal shield and lettering under magnification. Fourth, look at the edge and rim for anything unusual. Fifth, test whether the coin is magnetic, because the standard 2012 penny has a steel core. And finally, examine that color change carefully. Is it even toning? Is the copper plating worn away? Is there corrosion? Or does the surface show evidence of an actual minting problem? That final question is the one that could turn an ordinary penny hunt into something much more interesting. Because millions of 2012 pennies were produced, the date alone is not enough. The real excitement comes from finding something that separates your coin from the millions of normal examples, and that is why I would not throw this penny away just because it looks discolored. Its unusual appearance deserves a closer inspection, but I also would not call it a fortune based on color alone. If the unusual feature turns out to be a genuine mint error and the coin has strong original surfaces, then professional authentication could be worthwhile. Until then, keep it safe. Avoid cleaning it. And remember one simple rule of coin collecting. Sometimes the smallest detail is the detail that matters most. Royal Mint. Now, let's take a close look at this 1963D Lincoln penny, because this is exactly the kind of coin that can make a collector stop and look twice. At first, it may seem like an ordinary old penny, but the fact that this example is in extra fine condition makes the details much more interesting. The 1963D Lincoln cent was struck at the Denver Mint, and more than 1.77 billion were produced that year, so the date itself is not considered rare. But here is where the excitement begins. When a common coin survives with unusually strong detail, and especially when it shows a genuine variety or mint error, its value can change dramatically. PCGs start with the obverse. You should see the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln facing right, with "In God We Trust" across the top, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1963 on the right. And directly below the date is the small letter D. That tiny D is extremely important because it tells us this penny was made at the Denver Mint. The Lincoln portrait was originally designed by Victor David Brenner, while the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse was designed by Frank Gasparo. This design combination had already become one of the most recognizable sights in American pocket change by 1963. Graysheet. Now look at the condition of your coin. An extra fine example should still have a strong Lincoln portrait with most major features clearly visible. You may notice some wear on the highest points of Lincoln's hair, cheek, and coat, but the design should remain sharp and easy to read. The lettering should be clear, the date should be strong, and the rim should remain mostly complete. On the reverse, pay special attention to the Lincoln Memorial. The columns, steps, lettering, and building details should still be visible. This is where condition can separate an attractive old penny from one that has been heavily circulated, but there is something even more exciting to check before you decide what this coin is worth. The 1963D Lincoln cent has recognized double die varieties. PCGs lists 1963D double die obverse examples, including the FS101 variety. That means you should take a magnifying glass and carefully inspect the lettering and date, rather than assuming every unusual line is damage. PCGs look especially around the date, Liberty, and the lettering of "In God We Trust." A genuine double die is part of the die itself, and normally creates a repeated or spread appearance in specific design elements. A random scratch, machine damage, or a hit from another coin is something completely different. This distinction is incredibly important. Collectors do not pay big money simply because a coin has a strange-looking line. They want an identifiable variety that can be confirmed. And now comes the part that makes this 1963D penny so interesting. A normal circulated example is generally worth very little above face value. One current reference estimates ordinary 1963D examples around the lower dollar range, even in uncirculated grades, depending on condition. USA Coinbook, but high-grade examples tell a completely different story. PCGs records a 1963D Lincoln cent in Ms. 67 ARD with an auction record of $7,499, while Great Collections reports a much higher $14,625 sale for a PCG's Ms. 67 ARD example. PCGs, that is the wow factor right there. A penny that was originally worth just 1 cent can become a 4-figure or even 5-figure collectible when it reaches an extraordinary certified grade. But remember, an extra fine coin is not the same as an Ms. 67 coin. Your coin's visible condition matters enormously. An EF example with normal wear should not be valued like a nearly perfect mint state specimen. There is another fascinating possibility. PCGs also lists 1963D Lincoln cents struck with the doubled die obverse variety. Some examples have sold for significantly more than ordinary coins, although values vary greatly according to the exact variety, condition, color designation, and certification. One recorded FS 101 brown example sold for $40 in 055, while another 1963D doubled die example has an auction record of $358 in Ms. 64. PCGs. So when you examine your 1963D penny, don't just look at the date. Look at everything. Check the D mint mark. Study Lincoln's portrait. Inspect the lettering. Examine the date under magnification. Then turn the coin over and study the Lincoln Memorial, the columns, the steps, and the words 1 cent and United States of America. If something appears doubled, unusually raised, missing, or dramatically different from a normal example, that is when you may have a coin worth investigating further. And please remember one important rule: never clean this penny. Do not scrub it, polish it, or use chemicals to make the copper shine. Collectors generally want original surfaces, and cleaning can leave permanent hairlines and reduce collector appeal. The copper composition of this era is also important. The 1963D cent is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, weighs about 3.11 grams, and measures 19 millimeters across. PCGs. So what makes some 1963D Lincoln pennies valuable? It comes down to the combination of condition, original color, strike quality, and especially recognized varieties or errors. A worn example with no unusual features may be worth only a small amount. A nice uncirculated coin can bring a premium. A superb red mint state example can bring thousands. And a rare, authenticated variety can attract serious attention from specialists. That is why this little 1963D Lincoln penny deserves a second look. More than 1.7 billion were made. Yet the finest survivors and unusual varieties can be dramatically more valuable than the ordinary coins that pass through millions of American hands. And if your example really is extra fine, with strong details and an unusual feature that turns out to be genuine, don't dismiss it just because it is a 1963 penny. Sometimes the most exciting discovery isn't an ancient gold coin or a famous silver dollar. Sometimes it is a small Lincoln penny sitting quietly in an old collection, waiting for someone with a magnifying glass to notice the one detail everyone else missed. PCGs. Get this 1968 Canadian 1-cent coin. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary old penny, but its attractive, almost new appearance can make it especially interesting to collectors. The 1968 Canadian penny was issued during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The obverse features the young queen wearing a tiara with the inscription Elizabeth to D.G. Regina on the reverse. You can see the classic Canadian design of 2 maple leaves on a single twig, along with 1 cent, Canada, and the date 1968. Coinsand Canadacum. This coin was made from a bronze alloy containing 98% copper, with tin and zinc making up the remainder. It weighs about 3.24 grams and measures 19.05 millimeters across. The edge is plain and smooth. Coinsand Canadacum. Now, here is where the condition becomes important. You described this coin as extra fine, but it also has a new or fresh-looking appearance. If the surfaces are clean-looking, the lettering is sharp, the maple leaves still show strong detail, and Queen Elizabeth's portrait has only light wear, the coin could look much better than the average circulated example. However, there is an important difference between extra fine and mint state. Extra fine means the coin has been circulated and shows some wear. A truly new-looking coin with virtually no wear may qualify for an about and circulated or mint state grade instead. Depending on the amount of contact marks, luster, and remaining detail, the 1968 Canadian 1 cent had a large circulation mintage of 329,695,772 pieces, so the date itself is not considered extremely rare. Current collector guides list ordinary EF40 examples at only a modest value, while much higher grades can become significantly more interesting. Coinsand Canadacum, for example, published guide values show approximately $0.05 CAD for an EF40 example, while higher mint state grades can rise substantially. One current guide lists Ms. 64 around $12.2 CAD, Ms. 65 around $17.9, and Ms. 66 around $62.6. These are guide values, not guaranteed selling prices, and actual market prices can vary. Coinsand Canadacum. So if your 1968 penny really has that fresh, almost new appearance, don't judge it only by the date. Carefully inspect the Queen's portrait, the maple leaves, the lettering, and the fields around the design. Look for strong original luster, minimal scratches, unusual doubling, or other possible errors. And remember, never clean the coin to make it look newer. Original surfaces are important to collectors, and cleaning can damage the coin and reduce its desirability. A normal 1968 Canadian penny may be common, but a beautiful, high-grade example can be a much more interesting collectible. Sometimes, the difference between an ordinary old penny and a desirable coin is hidden in the smallest details.